Among Fallout 4's vast selection of weapons, there is only one that allows you to blow a hole the size of a basketball into an unsuspecting enemy. That weapon, of course, is the Broadsider, which isn't your typical everyday freedom dispenser. It's a cannon. Which now, of course, raises the question, can I beat Fallout 4 with only the Broadsider? We begin in the bathroom, where I designed a very angry man fit to be a sailor. Somebody tried to scam us. I told him off for that. And I started assigning special stats. I gave myself what I thought to be a fitting name, and selected Intelligence of 9 for higher XP gains and the ability to simply repair the ship rather than run around for the parts, Strength of 5 for the Heavy Gunner perk, and Charisma of 6, for some reason. Then, after comforting my child, I watched before my very eyes as my wife became a man. Neat. Rushing to the street, we ignored the desperate people begging for their life, and then quickly descended into the vault. And this is unfortunately where my past decisions came to fuck me. When Kellogg arrived, Nora, or I guess Nate, wasn't in his cryopod for some reason. I tried changing him back into a woman to see if that would fix it. It didn't. One quick reload later, and we were out of the freezer. Seeing as there's no cannons in Vault 111, I'd have to get out without attacking anything. Opening the evacuation tunnel, I was cornered in a mosh pit where I was forced to use my very few limited simpacks to barely escape. Nevertheless, I got the Pip-Boy and escaped the vault. And this is where the real game begins. I wasted no time scrapping as many objects as possible, then making signposts and wire fences. This got me to level 5 and allowed me to pick a few handy perks for later. I then moved on to the Museum of Freedom, not to help Preston, but to snag the power armor and the fusion core. I didn't necessarily need it, but it'd be good armor for later. I cowered behind Trudy as she and her son took out Wolfgang, taking the credit of course, and that was the exact moment I decided that it was time to head to the USS Constitution. Discovered Corvega, and got f***ing obliterated by 2 landmines. That cost me a bit of progress. Ditching my power armor, I continued on. Stopping at Bunker Hill, I screamed at the lady guarding the gate, even though I was like 3 inches from her. And finally, the USS Constitution was in my sights. Oh, and I stole the guidance ship from the scavengers, so they're kinda mad at me. Boarding the ship, I released hellfire on the ones that decided to follow me. Broadsider and a cannon are the same thing, so that's okay. And after speaking to Captain Ironsides, I used my intelligence to start repairing the ship. There was only one thing left to repair, but I couldn't simply just use my intelligence. I had to go to Corvega Assembly Plant to find turbo pump bearings. Now this was a problem. Corvega is filled to the brim with raider-packed hallways, and I have no weapon. At first, it was manageable, because they only had tire irons and switchblades. But their water guns did big damage to my feelings and left a few holes in me. I have no idea how those 2 died. Moving through the facility, I made it to the main room and was repeatedly assaulted by Molotovs and turrets. Fun. Anyway, after a few attempts, I managed to secure the bearings. Heading back to the ship, I was finally gifted the Broadsider.
I admire your pluck. Here is your amply deserved.
And with that, the ship took off, witnessed an American tragedy, and we were finally off to start the real game. And the first order of business was to murder a family of bloatflies, and a radroach. With that, I was able to snag the fusion core and move on, which meant now would probably be a good time to save Nick. Murdered a cult leader in front of all the people stupid enough to listen to him, and I got a bit overzealous. Right outside Park Street Station is a super mutant behemoth, Swan, who's not the friendliest. I was pretty much just shooting oversized BBs at him, which made him slightly upset. Moving through the subway, I largely decided to ignore as many enemies as possible. This is for 2 reasons. 1, my power armor has low durability, and 2, cannonballs are stupid annoying to find. You start with the base amount, 25 cannonballs, and can only find extras in select places scattered throughout the Commonwealth. Listed here. Anyway, back on track now. It was in Park Street Station that I discovered gun bashing. As you probably know, in Fallout 4, there are 2 types of attacks when using guns. There's the obvious shooting one, and then there's gun bashing. Whether you shoot somebody in the gut, or chip their tube with your barrel, it still does damage. Even with all that said, I still didn't really find myself using it that often. When I finally made it to Nick, I was down 7 cannonballs and a group of triggermen were chasing me. Nick refused to help me as I was assaulted to death. It also probably didn't help that I didn't have any more power armor pieces left. Nevertheless, eventually I killed them all. Spoke to Nick, and then proceeded to cower behind him as he took care of the big scary men. God damn. Eventually though, we did make it to Skinny Malone. Told Darla to leave him, and was given 10 seconds to get out. Topside, me and Nick both agreed to meet at his office in Diamond City, ignored Piper and the mayor, sold everything I didn't need to Arturo, and finally sat down to speak to Nick about my son. He informed me that the kidnapper's name was Kellogg, and then tasked me with retrieving the key to his house. Successfully sweet-talked the mayor, and did not set off for Fort Hagen. You see, by this point I'd already used up all 25 cannonballs, and I had no intention of gun bashing my way through the entire game. So logically, the only option was to look for cannonballs. The wiki says that several cannonballs can be found within the castle. Of course, you can see that it says in the castle armory, but my skipped over for that and assumed they'd just be lying around somewhere. But after wasting my time a little longer, I decided to go to the next place on the list, Fort Strong. Set a marker on my map, and was off by miles. I'm not even going to attempt to say the name of this place. Got mauled by a Mirelurk Razor Claw, and finally got back on track. I forgot to mention this, but traders can sometimes sell cannonballs in very limited amounts, which is where I got 3 more. And after arriving at the fort, I picked up an additional 10. Feeling satisfied, I decided to go find the railroad early, to make my life easier. Wasted all the cannonballs I just found, and then spoke to Desdemona, who asked for my help, after waving a gun in my face. And I decided to solve the ammunition problem for good. In Fallout 4, there exists a glitch to duplicate infinite amounts of ammo. All you have to do is build this conveyor belt contraption and make some perfectly timed grabs. I'll leave a link in the description for how to pull it off. Just know, I was at this for hours and it's not as easy as it seems. More often than not, I'd end up losing cannonballs rather than duplicating them. And by the time I was done, I ended up with a modest 80,000 cannonballs. Sweet. Modded my broadside to hold 3 cannonballs instead of 1, and then set off for Fort Hagen. Ran into a forest puppy along the way, blew his brains out, and got assaulted by his brother. Entered the Hagen, and had to reload a save because apparently Dogmeat was following me. Pushed through to the 2nd floor, and eventually made it to the man himself. I didn't even give him the chance to speak, and the battle lasted 2 seconds. For whatever reason, he really didn't want to die. Maybe it was the fact I was playing him very hard, or the fact that it basically had no armor. Either way, this was really annoying. I threw cannonball after cannonball, injected stimpack after stimpack, and finally, he fell before me. I watched the Brotherhood ride in with their blimp, and decided to go finally help Preston. This is a good time to mention that the Broadsider does a lot of limb damage. It would not be uncommon to cripple an enemy's leg or outright blow it off. Spoke to Preston and Sturgis. Committed suicide by falling off a building. And rained fire from the heavens down on the raiders. Shot my pellet gun at a Deathclaw. Realized I started a fight I couldn't finish. Luckily the Brotherhood of Steel showed up out of nowhere, and I stood back as the real heroes took care of the Deathclaw. Spoke to the settlers inside, and agreed to join the Minutemen. I figured they made the most sense to side with because of cannons and whatnot. Went back to Diamond City to speak to Nick, and walked in on him and Piper talking about me. He pointed me towards Goodneighbor, or more specifically, Dr. Amari, somebody who could analyze Kellogg's brain. Obliterated Finn, and sat down in the chair. Inside Kellogg's head, I learned his father used to beat him, but more specifically that he was interested in my husband. Learned about Institute teleportation, and was off to the glowing sea to find Virgil. But before that, I grabbed some power armor for increased rad protection. Surprisingly, nothing really went wrong, to be honest. No random Deathclaws or rad scorpions, or even blood bugs. Although there were a lot of pharaohs that tried to tickle me. Murdered all the cultists, and made it to Virgil's cave. He told me that I'd need a courser ship to teleport into the Institute, or more specifically the data on it, and luckily, he knows just where a courser is. Inside Green Tech Genetics, I took the fight straight to the gunners. There's only really one drawback to this gun, and that's the ammo capacity, but besides that, this gun actually is pretty solid. Like, of course you can beat Fallout 4 with only the Broadsider. It's literally a cannon. Mopping up the rest of them, it was finally time to get that chip. Pumped myself full of jet and sent 3 cannonballs straight into his nose, which while doing good damage, wasn't enough. In fact, every time I'd go to reload, he'd just heal himself, but eventually I took him out. snagged the Corsa chip, and decided to kill all the hostages. K-198 should be proud. She ate 2 cannonballs before dying. The gunner should not be proud. He was weak and died like a mouse. Took the elevator down and ended up in the railroad HQ, where I had Tinker Tom decode the Corsa chip. Tried to steal some fusion cores. That made them angry, and I reloaded quicker than Usain Bolt. Got the data and went back to speak to Virgil, and he gave me some plans for a teleporter, as well as asking me to get his serum for him so that he could become human again. Had Sturgis look over the plans, and actually had everything I needed to build the signal interceptor. Stood on the platform and prepared to get teleported, and finally entered the Institute. Uploaded the network scanner, and descended down the elevator to meet my son. Something was off. His hair seemed a little longer than usual. It also wouldn't even let me talk to him, and watched as he, like his mother, transformed. That's gotta be genetic. Spent a while here confused on what to do, but ended up just saving and loading, which seemed to do the trick. And my GeForce decided to hurt me. For whatever reason, my recording bugged out, which means I'm not able to show you me blowing father's head off, but you're just gonna have to take my word on that one. Bottom line is, the Institute hates me. Told Preston, and he tasked me with taking back the castle. Currently, the castle is infested with Mirelurks and a Mirelurk Queen. Told Preston we should draw them out instead of attacking them directly, and began fighting off the hordes of Mirelurks. Again, the cannon's a pretty good weapon, so this really wasn't that big of a challenge. The only hard part came with the Mirelurk Queen herself, who took many a cannonballs to take out, and also released her children on me, whom I promptly crushed. Eventually though, the day was won and the castle was ours, and so then started the tedious battle of doing 30 different settlement quests. First of which was to set up a radio tower at Hangman's Alley. The Broadsider made short work of anybody who tried to stop me. I didn't even necessarily have to hit them. As long as I shot somewhere near them, the splash damage usually took care of them. Setting up the tower, I moved on to the next settlement. Turns out some super mutants were harassing the settlers at Oberlin Station, so I went to go have a friendly chat with the super mutants. And this is getting really boring. I still had like 6 more settlements to help, and every time I thought I was done, he'd assign 3 more. Really all I was trying to do here was start the old guns quest so Ronnie Shaw would show up, and you know, progress the game. At one of the settlements, a funny little thing happened. Going here.
Oh, it hasn't been going here as you turn him rolling.
I just sent his head to the fucking heavens. With this being my second to last settlement, the end was in sight. Took out Ak Ak and moved on to the final settlement. Side note, what kind of name is Ak Ak? Her parents must have hated her. Anyway, at this settlement, apparently this dude's son ran away and joined the raiders, and he wants me to go find them or something like that. I don't know. On the way there, I ran into Pyro. He and his gang were pretty weak, not gonna lie, but he did give me some free power armor. Anyway, back to the task at hand. I successfully convinced Jake to ditch the raiders and return home. That made Slag slightly upset. Ended up dying here twice for some reason, but eventually took him out. Jake returned home. His father wasn't very happy about that, but his mother prevented him from killing his son, so it all turned out pretty well in the end. I finally got the quest for old guns and headed back to the castle. Met Ronnie, and she showed me the castle armory. Fought a decommissioned toaster, and picked up the artillery schematics. Gave them a quick test, and they're pretty effective. Donned the ugliest power armor in the game, and got the quest to defend the castle against the Institute. Made a stop at Diamond City to grab as many stim packs as possible, and ended up with like 20 extras. Attempted to beef up the castle defenses, but inevitably just waited out the clock instead. And when they attacked, we were ready for them. Artillery rained down on the synths. I'm like 90% sure artillery is a cannon, so I think it counts. If you think I cheated here, feel free to smash that dislike button. Regardless, this fight wasn't a pushover. I actually found myself dying quite a few times. Honestly, this fight was more than anything, just kinda long. It took me a little over 20 minutes to finish, and when it did, I was just glad it was over. Ronnie told me to speak to Preston, who told me to speak to Sturgis, who then told me to harness my inner ratatouille and infiltrate the sewers. Or, I guess more specifically, the Institute. Got attacked by the Enclave on the way there. They apparently wanted their suit back, which is funny given how ugly it is. Anyway, moving on now. You know, I really don't understand the Institute as a faction. They say they're humanity's best hope for survival, and yet they are replacing humanity with robots? Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you ask me. I don't really know what that feral was doing. Eventually, I trudged through the sewers and made it into the Institute. Teleported my boys in, and so began the assault. Honestly, the only synths that were hard to kill were patrollers and coursers. Again, the cannonball just kinda isn't a bad gun, so I was able to take care of them pretty easily. Made it into the facility proper, and took out the combat gorillas. This time there wasn't any children involved. I think the scientists must have been a little confused. Broke both my legs, desecrating Father's body, and used his terminal to issue the evacuation notice and override the lockdown, which gave us access to advanced systems, or more specifically, the reactor. Didn't kill the defenseless scientists, which really goes to show how much restraint I have. Entered the reactor room and had a fun time fighting off all the synths. I'm pretty sure I killed like 5 of my own men at this point with this thing. It has a lot of splash damage. Took out the security turrets and murdered a cripple. Finally planted the charge and witnessed this monstrosity. This armor really is hideous. Told my son I didn't love him and that I was leaving him to die. Got teleported out, and I watched in gratuitous slow-mo as my son's life's work was annihilated. Nice. Well, this was a fun challenge. I know it's been a while since I last posted, but here I am. Fashionably late, as always. I'm aware this isn't the typical kind of game I'd play, but I wanted to give the Fallout challenge a try. I also did this in honor of one of my personal favorite YouTubers, who unfortunately passed away in mid-December last year. Anyway, on a lighter note, thanks for watching. Bye!